Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Noah's Ark. According to the information in ancient religious texts like the Bible and the Torah, a man named Noah was charged with building a giant wooden ark to save the world's animals from the Great Flood. Religious manuscripts would have us believe that the legendary ark landed on Mount Ararat, a sleeping volcano near the eastern border of Turkey. New 3D scans of this exact area have revealed what could be the lost ark. Scientists have uncovered a boat-like structure beneath the ground that matches almost the exact dimensions of Noah's Ark the way it's described in the book of Genesis. Andrew Jones was the lead scientist on this project, as well as Dr. Fethi Ahmet Yüksel from Istanbul University. They believe the results of their scans show irrefutable proof that a giant boat is buried underneath the mountain. Even though it's impossible to say for sure whether this really is Noah's Ark from the Bible, there is definitely, according to the experts, an underground boat. They say the right angles identified in the scans are not something seen in nature or in any geological formation. Whatever's underneath the mountain certainly appears to be man-made. But of course, other members of the scientific community remain skeptical. And because of this, gathering the needed funds and getting the grants and permissions to excavate at the site has so far proven impossible. I guess we'll never know for sure if this really is Noah's Ark until Mount Ararat is excavated, and without additional evidence, this remains unlikely. Until then, it will continue to be a mystery as to whether there truly was a boat large enough to contain 2 of every animal in the world's population of species. What do you think? Could this be Noah's Ark? Let me know in the comments below. Roman chariot burial. In Croatia, archaeologists have unearthed the incredible remains of a Roman chariot buried along with 2 horses. Both the horses and the chariot were fossilized by the time archaeologists dug them up. They say the elaborate burial was probably part of a ritual performed by an extremely wealthy family. This family was so rich that when one of their own died, they were able to kill 2 perfectly good horses and dispose of an extremely valuable chariot, just for the sake of sending the deceased off to the afterlife with some treasures. It was experts with the Institute of Archaeology in Zagreb who made the discovery near the small village of Stari Jankovici. They have so far been able to date the remains of the horses and the chariot to between 1700 and 1800 years ago. That means they were buried around the 3rd century AD, at a time when the Roman Empire controlled the region. In fact, the Roman Empire had been in control of what is today Croatia ever since 168 BC, when they conquered the last Illyrian king, Genthius. By the 3rd century, Rome was in control of all of Croatia. They had built roads to link the Black Sea with the Aegean Sea and both seas to the Danube River. And while you might think the chariot is the most interesting part of the burial, archaeologists are actually more intrigued by the horses. They are hoping to discover where the horses were bred. If they can figure out where in the empire the horses came from, they can get more information about the wealthy family that owned them. Iron Age weapons hoard. An amazing hoard of Iron Age weapons was recently found in Germany. Archaeologists made the remarkable discovery with help from the small town of Schmallenberg, high up on the Witzenberg mountain. The excavations were ongoing for 3 years, with experts slowly but surely pulling one weapon at a time out of the dirt. It's become the largest weapon hoard in the region and shows the complex processes of Iron Age steelworkers. The weapons have also helped to reveal more information on the ritual activities of warriors thousands of years ago, specifically after they had already won a great battle. The Wilzenberg mountain was visited by people around the year 300 BC for special occasions. On the very top of the mountain, archaeologists found the remains of a fortification made of nothing but wood and rock and dirt. Then, between 2018 and 2020, historians with metal detectors combed the sides of the mountain and plucked at least 100 weapons out of the ground, all of them belonging to the ancient Celts. The evidence seems to suggest that there was a great battle that took place in the area surrounding the mountain. Then, to celebrate the victory, the warriors brought all the weapons they captured from their dead enemies, as well as other things like belts and horse harnesses. They then mangled the weapons as best they could, bending swords, breaking harnesses, and putting them up on display in the mountain. Researchers say this was a pretty common ritual during the Iron Age. Warriors, instead of taking the weapons of their dead enemies and using them for something useful, destroyed them in a violent display of power. Yorkshire Abbey Bowling Alley. During the medieval period, Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire was a hub of industrial activity. Today, it's one of the most tranquil places in all of England, but geophysical surveys and the use of ground-penetrating radar have revealed the buried remnants of structures and buildings from centuries past. The radar scans revealed what archaeologists called an underground bowling alley, but in fact, it's just a medieval tannery. It looks a bit like a bowling alley because of how it turned out in the scans. In reality, this is a place where monks would have processed animal hides, turning normal hides into leather. This would have been a huge industry that made plenty of profit, meaning hundreds of people would have been employed here before the area was nothing but a grassy green field. To understand why this is so interesting, you really have to look at Fountains Abbey today. Nothing remains except the peaceful remnants of the abbey. Nobody would expect that at the time the abbey was functional, the entire valley was part of an industrial tannery. Researchers with the University of Bradford identified at least 2 substantial stone buildings, one of them likely several stories tall and over 100 feet long. Picture a medieval factory, only this one filled with monks working over raw animal hide to produce leather. World's oldest jewelry. Archaeologists excavating the Bismoon Cave in the southwest of Morocco came across something truly exceptional and one of a kind. They found the oldest jewelry in the world, a shell necklace that dates back roughly 150,000 years. The necklace was once composed of approximately 33 shell beads, worked from being normal shells into cute baubles befitting a necklace. This is without a doubt the very oldest singular piece of jewelry ever worn by a human being. At least the oldest that scientists have been able to find. But just who were these people making shell necklaces while Homo sapiens were still living in caves? This was 140,000 years before the first city on Earth began to even take shape. From what the researchers with the National Institute of Archaeological Sciences and Heritage say, the shells and the style of the beads resemble the Aterian culture from North Africa. These people thrived in the Middle Stone Age. Stephen L. Kuhn from the University of Arizona says the necklace was probably not only for embellishment, but a way for a person to express their identity and maybe even their personality through clothing. What this means is that the shell necklace was one of the very first ways of showing off who someone was as a person for the world to see. Isn't it incredible that humans and their near relatives were adorning themselves even 140,000 years before they lived in cities? I guess those 90s puka shell necklaces were really following an ancient trend. I want to give a big shout out to Carrie Aubrey and Martin Rooney. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe because we have lots more videos of discoveries coming up. Theater toilets. An archaeological dig in Turkey has discovered a theater commode in the old city of Smyrna. This ancient city can be found within the modern borders of Izmir, with the theater being over 2,000 years old. It dates to the 2nd century BC, but was used up until the 5th century AD. That's about 700 years, or about 7 times longer than humans have been going to the cinema. Now let me explain why discovering this ancient commode was so shocking. There are plenty of old theaters spread across Turkey, Greece, and Rome, but this is one of the first times that scientists actually found the remains of a private bathroom complex inside a theater. The commode is shaped like a U and could have accommodated about 13 people at a time. Beside it was a trough that probably would have contained clean water. Scientists are now saying that the toilet, because it was discovered backstage and not where the public spectators would have been, was used by the actors. This may just be the very first example of actors having their own private facilities. 2,000 years before any of our modern celebrities, theater performers in the Roman Empire were already getting special treatment. They had their own toilets and their very own clean water. The illicit lives of convicts. A stash of coins was recently discovered at Port Arthur in Tasmania, giving us a glimpse into the illicit lives of convicts over a century ago. The reason the coins are so interesting is that prisoners at Port Arthur working in the penal colony were not allowed to carry money. And yet this pile of silver shillings, which was worth about a week's salary for one of the overseers of the penal colony, was found buried underneath a workshop. Archaeologists were immediately fascinated by this mystery and wanted to get to the bottom of it. According to the Conservation Project officer Silvana Sidzik, the discovery was immediately seen as out of place. Convicts did sometimes have coins, but this amount of money was just too substantial. The coins were underneath the clay floor of a workshop where the prisoners would have been forced to do copper casting. Historians at the site believe whichever convict buried these coins in the clay floor managed to steal them from an officer and then hide them away for later use. But of course, this prisoner never was able to make it back and reclaim what he had stolen. These silver shillings came from between 1814 and 1844, so they were probably stolen sometime in the 1850s. The prison workshop was operational from between 1830 until about 1877, back when Tasmania was a full-blown penal colony. People were shipped from all over the world to do their time making shoes, working iron, and forming copper. Roman kitchenware. In Bulgaria, archaeologists have been excavating a Roman legionary camp from over 2,000 years ago. What's really interesting isn't the camp itself, but the discovery of Roman kitchenware, including pots and lids, bowls, drinking vessels, and ordinary cups. All the kitchenware was found inside the officers' quarters, all of it made from such good quality clay that the bowls could still be used today. The officers' quarters is known to the archaeologists as the House of Centurion. It's an absolutely huge building, looking more like a luxurious villa than the house for a military commander. The complex had a courtyard, a pool, various buildings, and a massive dining room. Judging by the sizes of the dishes, food was only prepared for the centurion and his deputies or a small group of guests. Archaeologists were also able to look at nearby animal bones to determine that the food eaten by the centurion was much better than what his legionnaires ate. Basically, if you were a Roman commander, you lived a life of absolute luxury. But honestly, who's surprised? Lost statues. Archaeologists in Turkey have discovered lost statues of Aphrodite and Dionysus. These amazing sculptures were uncovered in what was once the Greek city of Izanoi. It was occupied as early as the Bronze Age. This city was a major source of political and economic influence in the Hellenistic period of Greece. But then, in 133 BC, the city was given to Rome, and it became part of the Roman province of Phrygia Pacatiana. One of the most impressive structures still preserved in the city is the old Temple of Zeus. The archaeologists didn't uncover the whole statues, just the heads of the gods. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of love and beauty, while Dionysus was the god of wine, feasting, and ritual madness. They were pivotal figures in Greek religion and myth. The reason it's so interesting that the statues were found here is that it shows how the Romans continued to worship Greek gods, even if they did change their names long after they took over their cities. Considering the incredible parallels between Greek and Roman mythologies, this makes perfect sense. The Falkland Islands wolf. Archaeologists working in the Falkland Islands have discovered evidence that humans made their way to this remote archipelago about 1,070 years ago. Even more interesting, evidence shows that these visitors may have brought fox-like creatures with them, known as wara. These creatures are what we know of today as the extinct Falkland Islands wolves. For a long time, scientists have been debating how the only land mammal here made it across the ocean. The two theories are that the wolves either reached the Falkland Islands by a land bridge or were brought over by people. But until recently, almost no evidence has been discovered of a human presence on the island prior to Europeans arriving in 1690. Now, archaeologists have found traces of ancient fires and the remains of animals that had been hunted over 1,000 years ago. From what they can tell, the Falkland Islands were inhabited by the Yagan people, which were ancient seafarers. This evidence comes in the form of charcoal levels in sediment, showing that humans were building fires from between 1070 and 620 years ago. That's much earlier than the traces of European fires found from roughly 250 years ago. Plus, archaeologists found huge piles of the remains of sea lions and penguins. These animals were killed before Europeans hunted them to extinction in 1875. But the real mystery is that researchers have identified teeth from the Falkland Islands wolf that date back 3,860 years. That leaves a 2,000-year gap between the wolves and the humans. It's impossible to say now whether humans visited earlier and brought these wolves with them, or if the wolves had somehow made their way to the extremely remote archipelago by themselves, perhaps by a thin strip of land that is now buried under the ocean. Mysterious shipwreck. In October, a mysterious wooden shipwreck appeared along the Baltic Sea coast in Latvia. A group of locals noticed the planks poking up through the sand and expected to find some small boards. Much to their surprise, it was an entire ship. Measuring roughly 40 feet long, the vessel is made of oak timber planks and copper nails, which were common features of 19th century Royal British Navy ships. At some point in time, the ship was likely covered in copper plates, which would have protected the wood from mollusks, shipworms, and saltwater corrosion. Equipped for long-distance travel, it was likely a warship or a merchant vessel. The ship was sturdy enough to withstand the often turbulent Baltic and North Seas, and it may have ventured as far as the tropics, according to a spokesperson for Latvia's National Cultural Heritage Board. The British Royal Navy rapidly expanded its fleet starting in the late 18th century, with each new ship requiring around 4,000 mature English oak trees. A lot of forests were cut down, especially since wood isn't the most durable material, as the archaeologists who dug up the ship would know. The moment it made contact with the air, it began to deteriorate. It will be time-consuming and expensive to preserve, but the government is thankfully stepping in to help. Bizarre dinosaur. Between 72 and 75 million years ago, an armored dinosaur with a bizarre weaponized tail roamed the Patagonia region of what is now southern Chile. Measuring roughly 6.5 feet long, this Cretaceous creature, dubbed Stegosaurus elengasin, was a type of herbivorous dinosaur called an ankylosaur. It somewhat resembled a stegosaurus, minus its tail, which scientists have likened to an extremely flat sword or an Aztec club called a macuitl. The deadly appendage is unlike any other tail ever seen on a dinosaur. It's short for a dinosaur tail, but functioned as a rather effective weapon against its enemies. The newly described specimen died near a river, where it may have been sucked into the ground by quicksand. A. elengasin's fossils show that ankylosaurs evolved much differently in different parts of the world after the supercontinent Pangaea broke up around 200 million years ago. The event split Pangaea into two separate landmasses, the southerly supercontinent Gondwana and Laurasia, which sat largely in the northern hemisphere. Very few ankylosaurs have been found in the region that once encompassed southern Gondwana, and the ones that have were much different than their neighbors to the north. They were smaller, with thinner legs and lighter armor, according to lead study author Sergio Soto Acuña, who told reporters about the discovery. What do you think about this dinosaur? Which dinosaur is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Human ancestors who walked on 2 feet. Australopithecus sediba was an early relative of modern humans that lived in Africa around 2 million years ago. The first fossils of the species were found in 2008 at the Malapa site outside Johannesburg, South Africa, in a region known as the Cradle of Civilization. They were unfortunately too badly decomposed for scientists to tell if A. sediba walked on 2 feet. More fossils belonging to a female nicknamed Isa were discovered at the same site in 2015. These newer examples consist of one of the most complete lower spines from that early on in the hominid record. In a recent study, researchers determined that A. sediba had a spinal curvature similar to that of a human female, and that the species would have been able to stand and walk comfortably on 2 legs. But they weren't too much like modern humans. The evidence also showed that A. sediba spent a lot of time climbing trees. By studying how our ancestors developed, scientists are not only learning more about the history of human evolution. The findings could potentially help them gain insight into modern-day health issues, like how and why our lower back is prone to injury. It's pretty incredible considering how archaeology and paleontology can provide information that benefits our health today. Bronze Age facial reconstruction. Sometime during the Bronze Age, a powerful woman died in what is now southeastern Spain. She was between 25 and 30 years old when she took her last breath and was laid to rest in a burial urn with a silver diadem or a crown atop her head. An array of lavish goods were deposited into the grave, including bracelets, hair pieces, earrings, silver rings, beaded necklaces, a drinking pot, and more. Archaeologists unearthed a ceramic vessel containing the woman's remains in 2014 in an area known as La Almoloya. In it, they also found the skeleton of a man who appeared to have died just a few years before her. The duo hailed from the Bronze Age El Argar culture, which lasted from around 2200 BC to 1500 BC. Researchers don't know who either of them were or how the two were connected, but it's apparent based on the woman's luxurious grave goods that she was a higher-ranking member of their society than the man was. In fact, her community gave her an elite burial even though she had outlived her male partner, suggesting that perhaps the woman's power had nothing to do with the man. Maybe he was her lover. A thorough examination of her skeleton showed that she died with several health conditions, including a missing rib and neck vertebra. Experts recently reconstructed her face, adding a human element to the discovery and making us feel just a little more connected to the past. Illegal colonial currency. While sifting through hundreds of old coins at their estate in Northumberland, England, a member of the Wentworth family found a silver coin that was minted in Boston, Massachusetts in 1652. It was probably brought back to Britain by one of the family's ancestors, who settled in New England during the colonial era. A descendant of the settlers named Wentworth Beaumont took the tin full of coins to James Morton, an expert from the London-based Morton and Eden auction house. He noticed the colonial shilling right away, later recalling in a statement that he could hardly believe his eyes. One side of the coin features the letters NE for New England, and the other bears the Roman numeral 12 to reflect its monetary value. Only an estimated 40 of these shillings survive today, and the recently discovered coin is the only one to ever be certified as being in mint condition. It was actually illegal to mint coins in the New World. Settlers were required to trade using wampum and currency from other countries, but they found themselves facing a coin shortage, and the Massachusetts General Court commissioned silversmith John Hull to strike the shillings. The first version of the coin, which is what the Beaumont family found in their attic, was simple and easy to counterfeit, so silversmiths improved the design over time. For the next 30 years, they stamped all the coins they made with the year 1652, so that the British wouldn't suspect that there was still any minting going on. But the authorities found out anyway, and in 1682, King Charles II shut the mint down for being treasonous. The Beaumont family shilling was recently sold at auction to an anonymous buyer for $351,912. Quite a bit more valuable than the illegal shilling was ever intended to be. A ferocious prehistoric marine reptile. Back in the 1970s, paleontologists in Boyacá, Colombia, unearthed the partial skull of a prehistoric marine animal resembling a swordfish. The creature was classified as a type of large, extinct aquatic reptile called an ichthyosaur, and while scientists got this part of its taxonomy correct, they accidentally labeled it under the wrong species. In fact, it wasn't until recently that a researcher finally noticed that the fossils represent a new animal. Measuring roughly 3 feet long, the creature's skull is packed with a pair of elongated jaws filled with terrifying gnarly teeth. Dubbed Kaitaisuka Sakikarum, it swam in the world's oceans between 115 and 130 million years ago, following the mass extinction that marked the end of the Jurassic period, and it reached anywhere from about 4 to 5 meters long. At the time, Colombia was an ancient biodiversity hotspot, according to researcher Durley Cortés, who spoke with reporters about the discovery. Unlike other ichthyosaurs, which had small, even-sized teeth, the newly identified specimen had teeth that were adapted to catching large prey. These terrifying chompers opened to somewhere between 70 and 75 degrees and were equipped to catch, crush, puncture, and saw through other marine reptiles and big fish. Discoveries like this are imperative for piecing together our murky understanding of how marine ecosystems evolved. Can you imagine coming across a terrifying creature like this while underwater today? Yikes! Mysterious mummy. Around 800 years ago, a young adult died in Peru and was mummified before being buried near the coast. The body's preparers wrapped the corpse in cloth, put the person's hands over their face, and tied their limbs and body up with a rope. These rituals were customary among the Andean cultures who lived in the region before the Incas rose to power around 1400 AD. Archaeologists discovered the mummy right outside the capital of Lima earlier this year. The area, known as Cajamarquilla, was once home to one of the biggest and busiest pre-Hispanic settlements along the Peruvian coast. The team believes that the individual was a young man who died between the ages of 25 and 30, but they have yet to confirm this. He was found in an oval-shaped tomb beneath the city square, suggesting that he was an important person, perhaps a trader who had moved to the town from elsewhere to sell his goods. The mummy's tomb was filled with ceramics, stone tools, and other grave goods. There were also signs that people visited his burial long after he died and left offerings of meat and vegetables. The team is currently awaiting radiocarbon dating and other test results so they can get a more precise idea on when the person died and perhaps who he was to his community. Oldest denisovan fossils. It seems crazy to think about, but at one point in time, several different species of humans walked the earth. Scientists know relatively little about these different groups of archaic humans, but are learning more as they continue to investigate. For example, in 2010, a DNA test revealed the existence of an extinct hominid group called the denisovans, who, aside from the Neanderthals, are our closest known relatives. The test results indicated that the denisovans had a Neanderthal-like build and dark features, and much like our extinct cousins, the Neanderthals, they interbred with humans, with some people still carrying denisovan DNA in their blood right now. But for the most part, these ancient relatives of ours are largely a mystery to experts. Fossilized evidence of the denisovans has only ever been found in Siberia and China, but genetic testing indicates that there were several distinct groups of them, and that they may have once been widespread across Asia and Oceania. Scientists recently announced the discovery of the oldest denisovan fossils ever found to date. Like most of the others, they were unearthed inside Denisova Cave in Siberia. Based on the age of the soil they were found in, the bones are around 200,000 years old. They were found among an array of other artifacts that have never been mixed with denisovan remains until now, including animal bones and stone objects that may have been used as tools. The team plans to study these items more closely to determine any connection they may have had with the denisovans. So far, it appears as though the ancient hominids ate well during that time period, which was marked by a warm climate, making the area near the cave ideal for human habitation. They may have also competed with wild dogs and wolves for food and shelter. Could you imagine living back then? That'd be really scary. Aztec altar. While excavating at the ancient Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan near modern-day Mexico City, archaeologists found a 16th century altar and a pot full of cremated human remains. By the 16th century, the Spanish had conquered the city. The team that discovered the altar believe it dates back no further than the defeat of the city's Aztec ruler by Hernán Cortés in 1521. Known as the Battle of Tenochtitlan, this skirmish is commonly thought of as the beginning of the Aztec Empire's end. The altar sat inside the courtyard of a family's home. It is here where the family would have held a goodbye ritual of sorts before their culture was destroyed and their lives as they knew them were about to change dramatically. The altar was buried 13 feet below ground, according to archaeologist Mara Becerra, who believes that the family probably concealed it on purpose to keep it away from the conquistadors' view. Becerra theorized that the family was from the indigenous Mexica culture that eventually formed the Aztec Empire. Rare Roman mosaic. Jim Irvine was walking around on his father's property in Rutland, England last year during the COVID lockdown when he noticed some unusual pottery. He and his family helped archaeologists excavate the site, where they uncovered a huge Roman mural depicting scenes from Homer's Iliad. Measuring 36 by 23 feet, it's the first mural of its kind ever found in Britain. Anyone else find anything good during lockdown? Let me know in the comments below. Experts believe that the mural belonged to a wealthy homeowner who used it as the floor of his dining room or an entertaining area. Dating back to the 3rd or 4th century, it features images from Achilles' defeat of Hector at the end of the Trojan War. There are 3 scenes. The first depicts the pair fighting, the second shows Achilles dragging Hector's corpse, and in the third, the Trojans are preparing to get Hector's body back by paying his weight in gold. After digging up the mosaic, the team reburied it with plans to retrieve it when they're ready. It's been damaged over the last 1,700 years by fire and building projects, and the archaeologists don't want to risk causing any more harm to it while they figure out their next step. The villa's owner was not only wealthy, he was also well-read, according to project manager John Thomas. He would have been familiar with the classics when he commissioned the Mosaic. In addition to the villa, the team found evidence of other ancient structures nearby. They believe that the home was abandoned, then used as a burial site. Ancient baby armor. In Russia, archaeologists discovered the grave of an infant from 4,500 years ago. Found inside the grave were small figurines, which scientists say could be ancient baby rattles that were used not only as toys, but also as charms to keep away evil spirits. The incredible discovery was made near the shores of Lake Itkul by researchers with the Russian Academy of Sciences. The infant was buried in a birch bark cradle and was no older than a year at its time of death. It had 8 small horned figurines placed on its chest. These figurines were carved in the likeness of human characters and to look like the heads of animals such as elk, birds, and creatures scientists have been unable to identify. The figurines were carved from deer antlers, found with internal cavities that probably would have been used to produce a rattling sound by inserting small pebbles. However, archaeologists can't be 100% sure. These toys are ancient and they may not have even been toys at all. They could have been buried with the deceased child to ensure a safe passage into the next world. But there is something even rarer about this burial. The infant was found with a unique piece of baby armor. It was wearing headgear made from 11 copper plates, with the appearance of an extremely elaborate copper helmet. It was at one point tied securely onto the baby's skull with leather laces. But the big mystery here is that researchers can't seem to figure out why the baby was given a helmet, as this just isn't something archaeologists are used to finding. Whatever the purpose of the helmet, all of these details in this infant grave make for an incredible and rare discovery. A medieval knight. The skeleton of a medieval knight has been discovered in Scotland, and while that itself may not be very rare, this particular skeleton was found on the site of tournament grounds from the Middle Ages. And even more, archaeologists believe they know who the knight is that was buried here. They believe the grave site, marked by a huge sandstone slab and a carving of the cavalry cross, belongs to Robert Morley. Historical records tell us that Robert was a nobleman who died during a tournament in the year 1388. By investigating his remains, experts were able to determine that the man was heavily muscled at his time of death, and that he had died in his mid-20s. They also discovered healed injuries sustained from earlier fighting tournaments. Robert had already recovered from an axe wound to the head and an arrow to the chest. He met his end, however, in his final tournament, when a sword sliced through his nose and cut into his jaw. An unfortunate way to go. The tournament took place in the city of Edinburgh. The local culture council says this newest discovery is one of the most significant the city has made in years, as it should help to show what life was truly like in medieval Edinburgh. You know, before the tournament ground was converted into a high school for royals in the 16th century. Ancient Korean love letter. Inside the tomb of a Korean mummy, archaeologists came across an extraordinarily rare love letter. The love letter was written by a pregnant woman for her deceased husband, Yuang Tae. When experts discovered his mummified body in a tomb in Andong City in South Korea, he had 13 letters stacked on his coffin. One of the letters, the most compelling by far, says, "My feelings towards you I cannot forget in this world, and my sorrow knows no limit." And that's just a piece of it. The letter goes on and on and on. The woman was absolutely distraught, especially because her baby would have to grow up without a father. She even beseeched the dead man to read her letter and visit her in her dreams. The letter dates back to the year 1568, or about 445 years ago. And although we don't know the woman's name, experts in Korean history believe her husband was part of the Go-seong-yi clan. They also say he was probably quite handsome when alive, as he was discovered to be significantly taller than most men in Korea at that time. Sekwan Yim from the Andong National University Museum, one of the first people to actually see the mummy, said his dark mustache probably gave him a charming appearance. The earliest matches. In a very rare and one-of-a-kind discovery, researchers from Israel believe they have found the very first matches ever made. Not matches like you or I know them today, but rather fire starters that Neolithic people used 8,000 years ago to start fires at their leisure. This is something we take for granted today, but being able to start fire on a whim was something that dramatically changed the course of human history. It's what brought us out of the caves and into the light. According to Professor Naama Goren-Inbar from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, scientists have found plenty of evidence of fire going back millions of years. But this is usually just from leftover fires, things like charcoal in the ground and ancient ashes mixed with the sediment. This is the first time actual evidence of how these people ignited their fires has been found. It wasn't a match that you would strike on the ground, but a cylinder that was rotated at high speed to generate enough friction to ignite tinder. The match would have been spun inside a socket on a fireboard. When done by someone who knew what they were doing, this would have created enough heat for flame in just a few seconds. In the end, it was really just a fancy way of rubbing two sticks together. But for our ancient ancestors, these portable matches were probably as invaluable as your smartphone is today. The Lindo Man. The Lindo Man is an exceptional bog body, one of the best ever found. He was discovered in a peat bog at Lindo Moss in the north of England back in 1984. Commercial peat cutters were out working when suddenly there was a mummy looking back at them from the muck. This came the year after the Lindo woman was found in the same area, as well as some assorted body parts of unknown origin that were found between the two. At the time, the Lindo Man was hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the 1980s. But what makes this bog body so rare? When the Lindo Man died, he was healthy and in his 20s. He also had a high social status. Scientists know this because his body shows almost no evidence of having to do any hard physical labor. So then the question became, why had a prominent member of society been strangled, suffered blunt force trauma and a neck wound, and discarded in the bog? We're not really sure. He was thrown into the swamp face down sometime between the year 2 BC and 119 AD. He is currently preserved and on display at the British Museum. But researchers can't say for sure why this individual was killed in such a brutal manner. Archaeologists have speculated that it could have been ritualistic, but the truth is, nobody really knows. He may be evidence of an early homicide. The Brewers Tomb. One of the rarest tombs ever discovered in Egypt belonged to an ancient brewer from 3,000 years ago. It was an archaeological team from Japan that found the brewer's tomb in 2014 on the west bank of the Nile, belonging to a man named Khonso Im Heb. He was the head of granaries for a group of beer-drinking worshippers of the Egyptian goddess Mut. According to National Geographic, the excavations began in El Kokha after the area was cleared of all modern houses in 2007. Archaeologists were finally able to look for tombs and other things from antiquity. It was as they were clearing tomb TT47 that they found the brewer, the walls of his burial chamber decorated in colorful paintings. These paintings show interactions between the brewer and his family, as well as depictions of rituals centering around beer. The beer cult basically drank copious amounts of beer and worshipped their goddess. It was, in all likelihood, just one great big party. And now for number 4. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Carrie Aubrey and Melissa Watson. Thanks so much for spending time with us. If you are new here, welcome! And don't forget to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. Ancient gaming tokens. The oldest known gaming tokens in human history have been discovered in graves from the Bronze Age. The small stones, carved in various shapes, are about 5,000 years old. They were uncovered from a burial site in Turkey at Basur Hoyuk. It's as if 5,000 years from today, some highly advanced humans were to dig up the ruins of your house and find your old Monopoly tokens. The experts found 49 small stones, each one painted in a vibrant shade of green, blue, red, black, or white. They are all different shapes too, with some looking like triangles, some look like little pigs, some are circular, and some are weird globs. Some of the game pieces were even made to look like pyramids. Plus, they found 3 dice made from white shell and black stone. But now comes the big question. Just what in the world were the game pieces used for? What kind of complicated game could ancient people have come up with that involved so many different gaming tokens? Well, it's hard to say. We do know that similar pieces have been found in more recent archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq, but never whole collections. They've only ever been found as single objects, so archaeologists thought they were just counting stones. Now that all the pieces have been found together, it represents a complete set. It's like finding all the pieces to a chess game. But archaeologists still can't figure out how the game was played. All we know for sure is that people have been playing board games since ancient Mesopotamia, all the way back in 3100 BC. A Viking Sword. Archaeologists have found plenty of old Viking weapons before, but now they have found something rare and unique. In 2015, the Maybach Viking burial was discovered and excavated in Orkney, Scotland. It dates back about 1200 years, to the heyday of Viking exploration. Inside the burial was a trove of treasures and goods from the Viking era, including one particularly interesting sword. The sword is a Peterson Type D sword, one of the heaviest weapons ever forged by the Vikings. Andrew Morrison, an archaeological expert, says there have only been about 30 of these blades found from the old Viking world. Half of them have been discovered in Norway, with the rest being found randomly in places like Russia, Slovakia, and even Dublin. The thing that's so special about a Peterson Type D sword is that the person who wielded it must have been insanely strong. These were huge swords, crafted in the 9th century to do maximum damage. If you wanted to literally cleave your enemy in half, this would have been the blade to do it with. It required a huge hilt for stabilization, but the end result was a devastating weapon. We don't know much about the man who was found with the blade resting on his 1,000-year-old remains, other than that he must have been a ferocious warrior. An ancient gemstone. While sifting through the rubble of the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a rare and unique amethyst gemstone that was used during the Second Temple period. The excavations were being carried out near the Western Wall by the city of David. The small oval stone was used 2,000 years ago, probably as a ring. Because the small gem was found amongst heaps of trash in the ruins of a drainage canal, archaeologists have come up with a pretty unique theory. Eli Shukran of the Israel Antiquities Authority believes the gem was worn on somebody's finger as a ring and used as a seal for stamping official documents. It likely slipped off its owner's finger and became lost in the drainage system for the past 2,000 years. It's like if you lost your wedding ring and then an archaeologist found it in the sewer a few thousand years from now. It's one of the oldest and most fascinating lost and found cases ever. The oldest string instrument. Here's yet another amazing discovery from Scotland, this time from the Isle of Skye. And rather than a brutal warrior's weapon used to carve people in two, this time we're dealing with a musical instrument. The instrument may have once been used by a peaceful bard, or maybe not. All archaeologists know is that they've uncovered the earliest stringed instrument ever found in Western Europe. Not much of it is left, just a single broken piece of wood. The wood is burnt, in terrible shape, and it was found sitting on the floor of a cave. And while most people probably wouldn't have even recognized it as anything important, archaeologists were able to identify it as part of the bridge of a lyre, one that was used over 2,300 years ago. Musical archaeologist Graham Lawson says the discovery has marked a significant change in musical history. Finding a stringed instrument in a Scottish cave has pushed the history of complex music back over 1,000 years. Because the lyre was almost exclusively used for song and poetry, it's a much more interesting find than something like a flute made of bird bone 10,000 years ago. And while you might think there have been older stringed instruments found in Rome or ancient Greece, that's not the case. The only older lyres found in the world came from Iraq, from 5,000 years ago. This one was built by the Celts, who apparently mastered string music before the Romans ever even occupied Britain. Ancient Magician's Curse. In Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a lead tablet dating back 1,700 years. The tablet is kind of horrifying for one simple fact. A curse was written on it by a magician. Yes, a very real, ancient magician. The tablet was discovered inside a Roman mansion being excavated by the Israel Antiquities Authority beneath a parking lot of all places. It was discovered in a part of Jerusalem called the City of David, an area with over 6,000 years of continuous human occupation. The mansion was in use sometime around the year 363 AD, just before it was destroyed by an earthquake. As for the text on the tablet, it was written in Greek. The inscription says that a woman named Kirilla invoked the names of 6 gods so that she could cast an evil curse on a man named Lennis, apparently over some kind of legal matter. The text says something similar to, "I strike down and nail down the tongue and the eyes of the opposition of Lennis." Basically, Kirilla was asking the gods to make sure that this person could in no way be an adversary. She wanted him to lose whatever legal battle the two were having. What's truly amazing is that this magician combined elements from at least 4 different religions to complete the curse. She used gods including Hermes, Persephone, Hecate, and Hades. One god is from Babylon, one is a Gnostic god, and the others are Greek. Overkill? I think so. Bodies at German Stonehenge. There is a German version of Stonehenge, a circular henge built in the Neolithic period around the year 2320 BC. This was just about 200 years after Stonehenge in England was put together by a different tribe of Neolithic people. The henge in Germany can still be seen today near the small town of Pamelta, just as impressive as the one in England, but not quite as famous. It also wasn't built out of stones, but rather with wood. In addition, it also features several different rings and a bunch of mysterious pits. According to archaeologists, the German Stonehenge was used as a gathering place for the local communities, a place where they would perform rituals. One of these rituals very well may have been human sacrifice, specifically the sacrifice of young children and women. We know this because scientists have uncovered the skeletons of both women and children inside the mysterious pits surrounding the monument. Archaeologists also found cattle bones, fragments of drinking vessels, and other materials often associated with Neolithic rituals. So far, at least 7 bodies have been found buried with ritualistic paraphernalia. And here's where things get really disturbing. Archaeologists have also uncovered random limbs, including severed arms, legs, and heads. Almost all the children were between the ages of 3 and 17, with the women being over 40. But unfortunately, we still have no idea how or why these particular people were slaughtered and dismembered. Ancient bear skeleton. An ancient bear skeleton was unearthed in the central province of Henan in China. Scientists believe, based on the size of its skull and the shape of its teeth, that the skeleton belonged to a black bear. It lived 2,800 years ago. And even though the skeleton of the bear is a little creepy, the really fascinating part is that it could prove that Chinese people were taming bears almost 3,000 years before today. I'm not saying the Chinese were walking around with bears on leashes, that's probably not what was going on, but archaeologist Ma Xiaolin does say that the Chinese were definitely trying to raise bears in captivity. When they did an analysis of the bear's left leg, they found it was shorter than the right leg. They wanted to find out why. After x-raying the bone, they found that the bear had suffered a fracture when it was a cub. In the wild, this kind of injury would mean certain death. But if the bear had been captured by humans and partly domesticated, it would have been able to grow to be an adult. And since it was at least 5 years old when it died, this has to be the case. We don't know what ancient Chinese people were doing with their bears. This one was found in a sacrificial pit that was used during the Western Zhou dynasty from between the 11th century to 771 BC. But other than just keeping them for pets and eventual sacrifices, we really don't know what the Chinese wanted with tame bears. The Cannabis Skeleton. Archaeologists recently discovered one of the largest collections of ancient marijuana ever. The weed was found in the grave of a man who died 2,500 years ago. This man had Caucasian features, and he was laid to rest on a wooden bed and given pillows of reeds. He was also buried in a shroud of weed with a series of 13 cannabis plants laid over his chest. This guy was literally buried in a marijuana blanket. But this doesn't mean he was a prehistoric stoner. Instead, he was probably some kind of magic man. He probably used cannabis either ritualistically or medicinally. He was discovered buried by a team of researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences in the Turpan region, located in the extreme north of China by the border of Mongolia. It's believed he was a member of the Gushi Kingdom, a group of people that thrived from between 3,000 and 2,000 years ago. They played a large role as traders on the Silk Road before they vanished, and apparently they were pretty heavy into the grass. Did you know that ancient medicine frequently made use of cannabis? Let me know in the comments below. Mexican makeovers. For the pre-Hispanic civilizations that lived in what is now Mexico, death was not the end of being beautiful. A new study has found that the ancient residents of Teotihuacan exhumed dead people from their graves and then painted them with cosmetic makeup during rituals of remembrance. In case you don't remember, Teotihuacan is the abandoned ancient city near modern Mexico City. It's filled with temples and pyramids, it was occupied before the Aztecs showed up, and it's full of mystery. One of these mysteries is that archaeologists found pots of cosmetic pigments here, which they've been able to directly link to death practices. The pots of pigment were made sometime around 200 AD, or about 1800 years ago. Back then, dead people were normally buried underneath the floors of their own houses. Sometime after they were buried, a high priest would come around to do a kind of last rites ceremony. They would dig up the body and then give the corpse a makeover. We don't know why this happened. Archaeologists guess it could have something to do with the economy. Since a lot of the pigments came from nearby mines, it probably promoted trade between miners, marketplace people, and the priests. We also know that only noble people received the post-death makeover, so it was probably quite an expensive affair. Tablet to the God Magnus. In the early 2000s, a team of over 60 archaeologists from the University of Leicester were working on a handful of sites in the city, doing excavations and other archaeological research. It was during one of these excavations that an ancient tablet was discovered dedicated to the god Magnus. A specialist from Oxford University was called in to translate what was inscribed on the sheet of lead, crafted either in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. It turned out that someone was extremely angry that they had been robbed. The inscription was a request to the god Magnus to punish the wrongdoer who stole his cloak. Someone had stolen this guy's jacket, and he was wildly upset. He asked Magnus to destroy the thief post-haste, then gave him a list of 19 suspects that could have been involved with the thievery. What's crazy about this is that nobody knows who Magnus is. If this was a god from 2,000 years ago, nobody today has ever heard of him. But if the god's name was being invoked for revenge, he must have been one seriously bad deity. And now for possibly the world's largest sacrifice. But first, I want to say a big thank you to Stax the Ripper and Blue Devil YT and Mom. Hi guys, and thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we have lots more videos like these coming up. Mass child sacrifice. Archaeologists have discovered what very well could be the largest single incident of mass child sacrifice anywhere in the world. The discovery was made in Peru, with over 140 children and 200 young llamas being ritually sacrificed about 550 years ago. It happened on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean at the time of the Chimu Empire. The scientific team behind the discovery was led by Gabriel Prieto of the Universidad Nacional de Trujillo, and while there have been plenty of incidents of human sacrifice throughout the world, especially in the Americas with the Aztec and the Maya, it was the Chimu civilization who really pushed things to the extreme. 140 may not sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's the equivalent of 4 or 5 classrooms of children massacred all at once. Horrific. And to make matters worse, nobody seems to have any idea why it happened. We know that at the peak of the Chimu Empire, they controlled over 600 miles of territory along the Pacific coast. We also know that their capital was Chan Chan, one of the largest cities in the Americas at the time. When it comes to South America, the only empire larger than the Chimu was the Inca, who actually put an end to these people in the year 1475. The children were all sacrificed sometime between the years 1400 and 1450, right at the end of the Chimu's long reign. It could have been that the kids were sacrificed as some desperate plea to an obscure god to save them from annihilation. We just don't know. The sacrifices were especially brutal, and researchers are trying to understand what led them to do this with their most precious members of society. Desert cemetery. In the middle of an inhospitable desert in China, hundreds of amazingly intact mummies were discovered back in the 1990s. These mummies were found buried in boats 4,000 years ago during the Bronze Age. Ever since they were found, the identities of the mummies and where they came from has stumped archaeologists. But a new study has revealed some interesting information. Scientists sequenced the genomes of 13 mummies, discovering that they were descendants of hunter-gatherers from the Ice Age. But they still haven't been able to figure out why they buried their mummies in boats, as this wasn't done anywhere else in the region. The only other culture we know about that practiced burying their dead in boats were the Vikings, thousands of miles away from these people and thousands of years after they were already gone. And to make matters even more mysterious, the mummies were covered in cattle hides at the time of death and placed in the boats with oars at their heads. Keep in mind that these were desert people, a group that wasn't living anywhere near the open ocean. Why they would bury their dead in boats is one of the strangest enigmas in Chinese archaeology that nobody has ever been able to figure out. What is your guess? Let me know in the comments below. Vampire child. Archaeologists have been left both baffled and horrified by the remains of a 10-year-old child found buried at an ancient Roman cemetery in Italy. This particular cemetery is believed to have been used strictly for burying people who may have possessed supernatural powers. This child was buried with a stone put in its mouth, likely as part of a funeral designed to stop the kid from rising beyond the grave. In other words, the local people thought the child was a vampire. Professor David Soren, one of the experts who's been excavating the mass burial site since back in the 1980s, described the child's burial as eerie and weird, going on to say that he's never seen anything like it before. The cemetery is called La Necropoli dei Bambini in Italian, which translates roughly to the cemetery of children. Experts have been able to date the site back to 400 AD, to a massive malaria outbreak that mainly killed babies and small children. Up until the discovery of this vampire child, the oldest person found buried here was a 3-year-old girl. But the supposed vampire wasn't the only peculiar burial here. Previous excavations revealed the bones of both infants and toddlers buried alongside objects frequently associated with witchcraft. These objects include creepy things straight out of a fantasy book, such as toad bones, raven talons, and even bronze cauldrons filled with the remains of sacrificed puppies. One child was even found buried with stones tied around her hands and feet. The sacred Mayan pool. It was in the middle of the first millennium AD that the Maya civilization was being decimated by drought. A series of droughts caused food to become scarce. It forced people to move out of the great Maya cities and seek refuge elsewhere, and it ultimately led to the collapse of this ancient civilization. According to a new discovery, the Maya knew exactly what was happening and desperately beseeched their gods for rain by conducting horrifying ritual sacrifices. Researchers have found evidence of what they've called a drought cult at the ancient site of Cara Blanca in Belize. The evidence consists of a Maya shrine, human remains, and other offerings at the bottom of a subterranean pool. The team of researchers believe the Maya journeyed to what they believed was a sacred pool specifically to purify themselves and leave offerings to the god of rain Chak to stop the drought. Researchers found offerings at the site from earlier periods, though these offerings were pretty bare bones. But later, near the end of the Maya lifespan, the offerings became extreme. People were sacrificing human lives, leaving behind their most precious valuables, and really putting out all the stops in a desperate attempt to get some rain. To understand why the Maya people were so desperate, keep in mind that they experienced decades and decades of heavy rainfall leading to a boom in their population. But the rainfall stopped in the year 660 AD. The rain was then replaced by drought, with the drought going on for so long that almost all their cities had collapsed by the year 800. Near the end was when the drought cult surfaced, massacring people and dumping their bodies in cenotes to appease the gods. But as we all know, it didn't quite work. Thanks for watching! Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for more amazing discoveries. See you later! Bye!